News of the times. Was this the Ripper's comeback? The 1889 Whitechapel murder. Welcome to News of the Times. In today's episode, we journey back to the shadowy streets of Whitechapel in July 1889, where yet another woman is brutally found slain, her body discovered in Castle Alley, mere steps from the sites of earlier infamous murders. Was this the chilling return of Jack the Ripper, or the work of a copycat exploiting fear in London's darkest corners? The police and the papers fear the worst. Alice McKenzie wasn't like the other so-called unfortunates the press was quick to label. She was a known washerwoman, a heavy pipe smoker, and by all accounts hard-working and sober, and yet her death bore eerie similarities to the Ripper's known victims: throat cut, abdominal slashes, and no witnesses. With the police scrambling, the public panicking, and even wild confessions from wandering lunatics, the mystery deepened. Was the killer truly interrupted mid-mutilation? And the newest theory being taken seriously by police was, could a cattle boat butcher from overseas be behind it all? And in today's further particulars, something different. We look to the Pall Mall Gazette of 1889, a respected left-leaning publication of the time, and their tittle-tattle gossip pages referencing Whitechapel. Quite interesting. Ah, you've made it this far. Well done. We admire your perseverance. These tales are brought to you by oversteeped tea and Colin the Cactus's silent judgment, although Colin was of no help at all in this. He's all spine and no substance. Great Aunt Edna, one mustn't avert one's eyes when looking at her. That hooked nose could easily poke something important if her face got too close. Says you are top drawer for lasting this long. Please reward her by liking, subscribing and sharing. You could possibly also knit her a shawl. And now, seeker of sinister secrets, on with the show. Background. Alice McKenzie. Alice, 40-some years of age, had lived for the past 5 to 7 years with partner John McCormack. They lived as man and wife. Alice took on work as a washerwoman and a charwoman. There are no indications from anyone who knew her that she at any time worked as a prostitute. She was generally not known to be a drinker, although she did occasionally have more drink than was good for her. Usually on these occasions she would go straight to bed. Although friends and acquaintances were quite clear that Alice did not work in the sex trade, the immediate assumption by the police and press was that she did. She looked like she was one of the unfortunate class, which was the usual Victorian euphemism for a woman who earned her living this way. Alice was described as being 5'4" tall, with light brown hair and eyes, and a fair complexion. Her forearms were freckled, and she had the distinguishing mark of having part of the left thumbnail missing. In general, within the neighbourhoods, was seen as friendly, cheerful and well liked. She was addicted to smoking and could be seen always with a clay pipe firmly gripped between her teeth. John McCormack. Her partner McCormack was 63 years of age. He worked evenings as a porter at a clothier shop. He and Alice had lived together for 6 or 7 years. They had an average relationship with occasional quarrels which were never violent in nature. On the day that Alice was found, Alice and McCormack had had tea together at their lodging house. She had given her money to pay the rent for their room, but Alice did not pay it. A quarrel ensued, and Alice left the lodging house between 6 and 9 o'clock. Alice was seen around 11:30 on infamous Flower and Dean Streets by friends who were sitting outside on a stoop conversing. They would be the last friends to see her alive, as they saw her walking away. Her body was discovered at around 12:50 a.m. on a Wednesday in Castle Alley, her body partly hidden by view by a cart. From the Western Times, the 18th of July, 1889, another woman murdered in Whitechapel. As we announced in our later editions of yesterday, about 1 o'clock that Wednesday morning, Whitechapel was the scene of another dreadful murder, similar in some respects to those which have been peculiar to that neighbourhood. It would appear that at about 1 o'clock a constable belonging to the Commercial Road Division was going through his beat through Castle Alley when he discovered a woman lying on the pavement near to a lamp-post. At first he thought it was simply a drunken person or one of the homeless wanderers of the neighbourhood who was making the pavement a sleeping place, but upon examination he discovered that she was lying in a pool of blood and that her throat was cut. He at once summoned other constables to his assistance, and the divisional surgeon was sent for. It was then found that the woman was dead, and the body was removed to the mortuary. The injuries. Further examination showed that there was a severe wound in the abdomen, from which blood had flowed copiously. The wounds appeared to have been inflicted with a sharp instrument. So far as can be ascertained, there was no attempt at further mutilations. If the murderer was the same as the one who perpetrated the previous outrages in Whitechapel, he must either have been disturbed in his fearful work or have been content to satisfy his thirst for blood in a less sensational way than before. Location of the crime. Castle Alley, where the body was found, is approached from the High Street in Whitechapel, near to Commercial Street, by a narrow passage. The alley itself is about 18 feet wide and about 100 yards long. With another approach from Spitalfields, the body was found almost in front of some public washhouses. The crime was perpetrated within the quarter of a mile radius common to the previous murders, and between the scenes of the death of Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly. The victim. The victim was about 45 years of age, 5'4" in height, with brown hair and eyes and a fair complexion. She is believed to have been one of the unfortunate class. She wore a red bodice patched under the arms, a brown skirt and petticoat, black stockings, buttoned boots, and a paisley shawl. She had no hat or bonnet. One peculiarity in the description may serve for purposes of identification. Part of the nail of the thumb on the left hand is deficient. Investigations. Soon after the discovery, the Chief Commissioner of Police and Superintendent Arnold were on the spot. Chief Inspector Swatson and Inspector Moore of Scotland Yard had since been investigating. It appears the murderer enticed the victim to a shadowed spot, partially concealed by a large wagon. No one heard any cries or saw the assailant. The tragedy has created much sensation in the neighbourhood, and the alley was visited yesterday by hundreds of persons. The audacity of the murderer. The audacity of the murderer may be imagined when it is stated that the scene is overlooked by a row of houses, the inhabitants of which would have been aroused by the slightest cry for help from a victim, and further, this vicinity owing to the opportunity it afforded for such an object as that which the murderer had in view, had been subjected to special patrol by reserve men of the police from another division. On the other side of the road on which the discovery was made, there is a continuous row of large warehouses and buildings, while the houses on the opposite side are partially hidden except for the upper story by a high boarding. Castle Alley is in the midst of a maze of streets and alleys, which are infested by perhaps the worst class society in London. It is within stone's throw of Dorset Street, Hanbury Street, and other notorious localities which abound in common lodging houses and are infested by unfortunates of the very lowest class in the East End. Easy escapes. The exits for the escape of a murder are numerous, as he could easily reach any part of Whitechapel or Spitalfields free from being observed in this poor locality. The police, while observing the strictest silence regarding the details of the murder, do not for a moment doubt that it is the work of the fiend who seemed to have left off on the 9th of November last year, when the unfortunate Mary Jane Kelly was murdered and mutilated in her own rooms. Whether this was his work or not, the Castle Alley murderer has decidedly shown that the fiend still lives and has no intention of closing his diabolical record. The murderer disturbed. Constable Andrews discovered the body lying on the pavement near the rear of the public baths and the workshops of David King and Sons. The body was still warm. Further investigation make it more and more apparent that the murderer was suddenly disturbed in his operation. The woman's clothes were thrown towards the face, but only the navel was slashed, and there was no protrusion of intestines. A constable was stationed at the court's entrance and a watchman at the baths. Neither heard anything. A clay pipe was found nearby, believed to be the victim's, as she was known to smoke heavily. Police response. Superintendent Arnold, Chief Inspector West, and Inspector Reed gave instructions for the body's removal and began a full house-to-house search in the vicinity. Chief Commissioner Munro and Colonel Monsell arrived within 90 minutes of the discovery. Only one man had been arrested by 8 a.m. Seen loitering nearby at around 5 a.m., a butcher's knife was found on him, but he was later released when identified by the keeper of the Victoria lodging house. Identifying the victim. A man named John McCormack came forward and identified the victim as Alice McKenzie, with whom he had lived for 6 or 7 years at a lodging house on Gun Street, run by a man named Tenpenny. McCormack said they had a mild quarrel the previous evening. Alice had never, to his knowledge, been out late at night before. He described her as hard-working and sober. He last saw her between 3 and 4 p.m. Tuesday afternoon and gave her 8pence to pay the rent and went to bed. McCormack worked as a porter at Parnell's, a clothing shop on Bishopsgate Street. He said Alice came from Peterborough and that she was a washerwoman and charwoman. History behind the murder. As we briefly reported this morning, another terrible murder, accompanied by shocking mutilation, was committed in the early hours of this morning in Whitechapel, the same district, it will be remembered, in which 7 murders of the same atrocious character have occurred in little more than 18 months. The inquest. The inquest opened at 5 p.m. at the Boys' Institute on Commercial Road before Mr. Wynne Baxter, coroner. The jury first viewed the body, which showed both the throat wound and the abdominal injury. John McCormack identified the body based on her face, thumb, and clothing. He reiterated that she was a smoker and had left the house in a bonnet. Witnesses: Elizabeth Ryder, deputy at Tenpenny's lodging house, stated Alice had lived there with McCormack for 4 months. She was usually home by 10 p.m. and appeared honest. Margaret Franklin testified she had known the deceased as Alice Bryant and last saw her at around 11:30 p.m. on Tuesday night on Flower and Dean Street. Cheerful and sober, Alice had previously lived at 11 Kate Street and was liked by all who knew her. Mrs. Isabella Hayes said Alice was quiet, sometimes drank and sometimes smoked heavily. She left the house at about 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday in good spirits. Alice was reportedly living with a man known as Jim. The household was not worried when she didn't return, as she sometimes stayed out after quarrelling. Testimony of police. Constable Allinger had supper at the murder site at around 12:20 a.m. and saw no one suspicious. Later, Sergeant Badman alerted him of the murder. Allinger fetched Dr. Phillips and officially reported the incident at around 12:55 a.m. T.C. Andrews stated he saw the body at 12:50 a.m. lying with the head towards the curb, the body still warm. Clothes were drawn up to the chin, legs exposed, and there was blood at the neck. He blew his whistle, and Sergeant Baldham responded. Dr. Phillips arrived at around 1:03 a.m. Andrews had passed through the alley at 12:25 and saw no body, confirming the murder occurred in the narrow window. Wagons near the body may have obstructed view from nearby windows. Finding the body. She was quite dead, and blood was still oozing from a deep stab in the neck. This wound alone would have caused death, but the woman's clothing being disarranged, the constable also noticed a severe wound in the woman's abdomen. No portions of the body had, however, been removed, as in previous Whitechapel murders. The probability was that the murderer was interrupted in the midst of his task and had to seek immediate flight. Search efforts. Sergeant Badham sealed off the alley and began a coordinated search of nearby lodging houses. Isaac Jacobs, a bootmaker, arrived on the scene and confirmed Andrews' account. PC George Need reported seeing Alice regularly at around 11 p.m, but found nothing on patrol that night. Sarah Smith, who lived nearby, said she heard no sounds or disturbance despite being awake. Other details. The police remained tight-lipped, but suspected the killer may have resumed after a hiatus. The crime bore enough similarities to previous Ripper murders to raise fears of a return. Although some doubted the connection, many noted the proximity to former killings, the selection of a hidden alley, and the method of attack. A letter was reportedly received from someone signing as Jack the Ripper, announcing plans to recommence operations mid-July. The location matched Castle Alley, and fear swept the East End once again. Latest particulars. While there is general belief amongst a considerable portion of the local police that the murderer has not left the neighbourhood since the murder and mutilation of Mary Jane Kelly on the 9th of November last, but that he had been living within a short distance of Commercial Street Police Station. There is a theory, which was mooted on the occasion of the last murder, that has as much more substantial foundation, a central starting point for the murder. The former belief receives confirmation in the fact that the whole series of murders, commencing with that about the August bank holiday last year, has been perpetrated within a mile radius of Golston Street in Spitalfields. Furthermore, it is pointed out that all the victims have been residents within the same area, particularly near Goulston Street, the centre of the radius. The Ripper versus the police. There is at least one point certain, and that is that the criminal knows considerably more of the workings of the police force in the district than the police know of the criminal's modus operandi. And this fact, which has long been recognised by the authorities, has led them to originate a system of short beat duty by which two officers traverse the same beat in opposite directions. It was thought that this would fog any outsider who had but an elementary knowledge of police duty, but, like all the efforts of the police in this direction, it has hopelessly failed. This theory was followed up with little success, as the police did not really know what they were looking for. Inspections of ships and the butchers on the ships were unsuccessful. There had been some reports that mentioned a foreign-looking chap giving more weight to this theory as police looked for any thread, whatever, however meagre, that could direct them to Jack the Ripper. A new theory. The second hypothesis is not only more feasible, but has today been taken up by the police authorities as a foundation upon which to base investigation. It will be remembered that November last it was suggested that the murderer came from one of the continental ports on board a cattle boat, and after perpetrating a murder, returned by the same vessel. The police have now reason to believe that the idea, which was ridiculed at that time, that the murderer is a foreign butcher, has some foundation, and accordingly instructions were issued to the detective department today. It has been noticed that the crimes have invariably been committed at about 1 a.m. on a Thursday or a Friday, and this has led to a growing suspicion connecting with the boats referred to, which arrives on Tuesdays and Thursdays, returning on the following days to their respective ports. The butchers employed on these boats land for the night and usually stay in the neighbourhood of Whitechapel. The blood, the clothes of such a man would not be regarded with suspicion, and it is stated that the clean cuts indicated the victims are peculiar to this class of men's mode of killing cattle, while the doctor's testimony has proved that the murderer has a rough knowledge of anatomy, and these men would possess that. The cattle boats. It has today been ascertained that some cattle boats arrived on Tuesday at the docks and sailed again today, and this, taken in conjunction with the above theory and last night's murder, has led the authorities to order to the East End and Thames Police today to watch all vessels about to leave the Thames, especially cattle boats which trade between London and Oporto and other Spanish ports, and also American ports, and request the cattlemen to give account of themselves on the night of Tuesday or the morning of Wednesday. Detective Inspector Regan, Thames Division, with a large staff of detective officers under him, are in consequence busily engaged in carrying into effect the order that all passenger vessels are boarded by officers and then the passengers carefully scrutinised. Shortly before midnight, a man who was observed to be persistently soliciting several unfortunates was arrested on suspicion of being the murderer of Alice McKenzie, but the police attach little importance to the circumstance and is fact only detained pending inquiries. The police are inundated with information, but nothing reliable has transpired. Letter from Jack the Ripper. As corroboration of the above theory and justifying the actions of the Thames Police, a letter was received a few days ago by Mr. Albert Backert of 13 Newman Street, Whitechapel, as chairman of the Vigilance Committee appointed some months ago, from Jack the Ripper, announcing his intentions of recommencing operations about the middle of July. It commenced Eastern Hotel Pop, and then thickly penned out the words, "Since this morning's murder, inquiries have been revealed that the fact that there is an Eastern Hotel in the East India Docklands Road, Poplar, used as a rendezvous by seamen. It is within a stone's throw of the docks. It is thought probable that the murderer may have been on voyage during the interval between the Miller's Court murder and the one perpetrated this morning. The conviction and fear that Jack the Ripper is still on the loose is palpable. There was firm conviction from many quarters that Alice was another Ripper victim, and that with the increased police presence in the area, he had not had time to complete his planned mutilations, similar in idea to Elizabeth Stride. List of the East End murders. Since Christmas week in 1887, 8 women have been murdered in the East End under mysterious circumstances, 5 of them within a period of 8 weeks. The following are the dates of the crimes, and the names of the victims are as far as known. 1. Christmas week 1887. An unknown woman found murdered near Osborne and Wentworth Streets in Whitechapel. 2. August 7th, 1868. Martha Turner found stabbed in 39 places on a landing in model dwellings known as George Yard Buildings, Commercial Street, Spitalfields. 3. August 31st. Mrs. Nichols murdered and mutilated in Bucks Row, Whitechapel. 4. September 7th. Mrs. Chapman murdered and mutilated in Hanbury Street, Whitechapel. 5. September 30th. Elizabeth Stride found with her throat cut in Berners Street, Whitechapel. 6. September 30th. Mrs. Eddowes murdered and mutilated in Mitre Square in Aldgate. 7. November 9th. Mary Jane Kelly murdered and mutilated in Dorset Street in Spitalfields. And number 8. July 17th, 1889. Woman murdered in Castle Alley, Whitechapel. A William Wallace Brodie turns himself in, claiming responsibility for the death of Alice, as well as numerous other murders that he does not want to talk about. Brodie is inebriated at the time of turning himself in, but all leads, however slender, are investigated. From the Shields Daily Gazette, the 20th of July, 1889. The Whitechapel murders, the trial of Brodie, extraordinary evidence. William Wallace Brodie, 33, was charged at Thames Police Court today with being a wandering lunatic with no fixed place of abode. Detective Inspector Moore attended from the Criminal Investigation Department, and Inspector Pinborn of H Division deposed that the prisoner came to Leman Street Station at about 8:30 p.m. on Thursday night and said he wished to give himself up for the murder of that woman on Tuesday night. Witness asked if he wished to make any statement, and he said, "Yes, I tell you, I murdered her on Tuesday night." "Don't tell anything about the other 8 or 9. Witness questioned him, and he said, "I shan't tell you any more. You can find out." Witness could get nothing more from him. There were some papers in his pocket, one being a license notice in the name of William Brodie. It showed the prisoner had reported himself at Scotland Yard on Monday, the 16th inst. While detained, the accused made no further statement. He was under the influence of drink. When he surrendered, Detective Inspector Moore, who saw the prisoner at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, said Brodie made a further statement to him, which he took down as follows. I, William Brodie, wish to give myself up for committing a murder upper court in High Street, Whitechapel, at about 2 o'clock on Tuesday morning last December. He added that he had come from Africa and that he had the knife with which he committed the murders specially made for him in Sheffield. While witness was examining his clothing, he said, "This is the 9th murder I have committed in Whitechapel, but none of them caused any trouble to my mind except the last. What with that and a woman in my head that wriggles about, I can't stand it any longer." Brodie was discharged from prison in August 1888 on a ticket of leave, and on Monday last reported himself at Scotland Yard, stating that that day arrived from South Africa and intended to reside at 2 Harvey's Building in the Strand. Witnesses found he had lodged there on the night of the murder from 11 o'clock on Tuesday night till 11 on Wednesday morning. Accused now stated he had not lodged at Harvey's Buildings, and the police officer stated that the accused was suffering from the effects of drink when he saw him. There was a razor in his bundle, but no knife. Sergeant Eugene Bradshaw of R Division said he had been to 2 Harvey Buildings yesterday morning. The landlady told him that Brodie slept there from 11 o'clock on Tuesday night and left at 11 a.m. on Wednesday. He came back at 8 o'clock on Wednesday night, drunk. Inspector Moore asked for a remand and said the prisoner had not yet been seen by a doctor. Mr. Lushington remanded the prisoner. It was afterwards decided to charge Brodie on his own confession with being the murderer of Alice McKenzie. As expected, the slender lead of William Brodie leads nowhere, as witness testimony confirms him with a solid alibi. William was, however, wanted on a fraud charge. The moment he was dismissed as a murder suspect, he was immediately picked up by the police on an outstanding fraud charge. As for Alice, like the many victims of the previous year in Whitechapel, there was no justice for her. The case went cold, and Alice was forgotten, another unfortunate who died. From the Western Times, 20th of July, 1889, The Whitechapel Murder, London, Friday evening. The Whitechapel murderer is still at large, and the police authorities are as yet in possession of no information that will lead to his identity. Some excitement was caused this afternoon by the publication of an unfounded rumour that the murderer had given himself up to the Whitechapel police and stated that he alone had committed the whole of the 8 murders. It arose from the fact that during last night a tall military-looking man went to the Leman Street station and stated that he was Jack the Ripper. He was, however, found to be insane, and the authorities, who attached no importance whatever his statement, detained him on the charge of being a lunatic. If the police had any suspicion that there was any truth in the man's story, they would have at once removed him to Commercial Street Station, which is in the district where the last murder was committed, but he is still detained at Leman Street as an ordinary wandering lunatic. Another man is under arrest at Commercial Street Police Station, and he was taken into custody this afternoon, and it was reported that he was arrested in connection with the crime, but the only charge against him is that of being drunk and disorderly. From the Western Times, the 23rd of July, 1889, the Whitechapel murder. Whitechapel has resumed its normal aspect. Since Saturday, the police have had no one in custody. Neither have any statements been lodged which would provide them with grounds upon which to base investigations. Detectives have today been making full inquiries into the antecedents of Brodie and have satisfied themselves that he could have had no connection with the murder. His confession is said to have been prompted by ill feeling against his brothers, who are respectable tradesmen in Clerkenwell. The police wish to make the prisoner an example to others who have been already shown a disposition to mislead the authorities at a time when their efforts are necessary in another direction. Acting on special instructions from Scotland Yard, the local police under Superintendent Arnold will, with the assistance of nearly 100 men drafted into the district from various metropolitan divisions, be placed on special beats and under such conditions that every thoroughfare will be guarded by at least 2 men, one in uniform and one in plain clothes. Up to midnight, no further apprehensions had been made. Throughout the day, the locality of the recent murder had been visited by thousands of curious persons, and it was only during the prevalence of a thunderstorm in the afternoon that there was any cessation in the continuous stream of good-humoured sightseers who had journeyed from all parts of the metropolis to view the spot where Alice McKenzie fell a victim to the murderer's knife. Notwithstanding the great crowds present, there was no disturbance. Further particulars. We start this different type of further particular story with a letter written to the church by the sister of Annie Chapman. From the Pall Mall Gazette, the 1st of May, 1889, in his speech at the Presbyterian Synod yesterday evening, the Reverend John McNeill created quite a sensation by telling the following tale. He was speaking of temperance and said that last Sunday, when he preached a temperance sermon at the Tabernacle, he received a letter that had been written by a lady on danger of the use at communion of fermented wine. The lady in her letter told a sad story of an inherited passion for drink. There were 4 or 5 of them, several brothers and 2 sisters, the children of intemperate parents. Her sister had unfortunately inherited the craving, and before she was 14 had taken to drink. The others became converted and did all in their power to cure their sister, but it was of no use. The sister at length married comfortably and children were born, but the craving for drink grew greater and greater, and at length she was sent to a home for the inebriates, where she stayed for a year. She left apparently, said the sister, a changed woman. Soon after, however, her husband caught a severe cold, and before going out one morning drank a glass of hot whisky, taking care, however, not to do this in the presence of his wife. Then, as was his custom before leaving, he kissed his wife. At once the fumes of alcohol passed into her, and in an hour she was drunk and a roaring woman. She went from worse to worse, and at last left her husband and her children, one of them a cripple through her drunkenness. The husband died 2 years ago, a white-haired and broken-hearted man, although only 45 years old. Need I add, said the sister in her letter, what became of her? Her story is that of Annie Chapman, one of the recent Whitechapel victims. That was my sister. That concludes this episode of Was This the Ripper's Comeback? The 1889 Whitechapel murder. We hope you enjoyed the show. If not, write your complaint on the back of a £50 note and post it to Somewhere Nice, UK. However, if we have managed to tickle your fancy, a like, subscription or a share would be the most welcome and may stop Colin from trying to unionise. This production is not responsible for any confusion, mild existential dread or sudden cravings for biscuits. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, piecing together history's more unsavoury puzzles.